Hey everyone, and welcome to the video. My name's Sally, and today I'm going to be sharing with you one of my very favorite recipes in the whole world. It's my coconut curry lentils. This recipe was initially inspired by Josefa Ciccarelli's recipe. I do hope I'm saying that name correctly, but I'll link it in the description box. This recipe is quite a bit different. However, if you're looking for something a little bit more straightforward, that might be a good place to start. That being said, don't be intimidated by the number of ingredients laying out in front of me. This recipe is quite straightforward and hard to mess up. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Here's what you're gonna need. We have 1 medium to large onion, several cloves of garlic. I have 4 or 5 right here. We have a sizable piece of ginger. You can see how that compares to my thumb, but you don't need to be precise. We've got 2 tomatoes, medium to large in size. If your tomatoes don't look good at the grocery store, just use a can of diced or crushed tomatoes. We've got 1 lime. Moving into the spices we're going to be using, we've got some whole coriander, whole cumin. I highly recommend using whole spices whenever possible. We have some turmeric, and we have a little bit of cayenne pepper. Lastly, over here, we've got some cinnamon. I've also got a mortar and pestle, which is just gonna help me crush up some of my whole spices. If you don't have one though, don't worry about it. And then we're gonna come over here. I've got a pound of green lentils. We've got some salt, some olive oil, coconut milk. This is full fat, light will work, however, it's not my preference. I have several large handfuls of some curly kale. And lastly, I've got my cilantro. This is about half of a full bunch. Doesn't need to be precise, but make sure it's rinsed well to get off any grit. And of course, we can keep the stems intact. We're gonna use those as well.
Hey y'all, hopping on here with the voiceover for the sake of clarity and hopefully sounding a little bit less awkward than I do just talking to a camera. One thing I absolutely love about this recipe is that it's completely vegan and gluten-free. So it's great for anyone and packed full of nutrients. Also, it's definitely a crowd pleaser, so always a go-to when I'm feeding large groups of people. Even the pickiest eaters tend to gobble it right up. So as you saw, I started just by chopping up my onion, adding a little bit of olive oil to my pan, heating that over about medium heat. It's going to depend on your stove. And I'm adding my onions right in there with the olive oil. You're just going to give it a little stir. Back over at our cutting board, we're going to peel and crush our garlic. I really love this little press, I guess, this rocking crushing tool that I have to press garlic. We're also going to grate some ginger here. You can totally do this with a sharp knife, but a box grater works really well. Just don't cut your fingers. We're chopping up our cilantro as well. I find that using fresh cilantro adds both a certain depth of flavor and a nice little zing. So I definitely recommend adding it, but I also understand if you're very against cilantro, it's not going to be the end of the world at all if you leave it out. And now I'm just slicing and dicing my beautiful tomatoes. Again, if you cannot find good tomatoes in the grocery store, just use a can of diced or crushed. That'll work just as well. I'm adding here my whole coriander and cumin into the mortar and pestle. Using these fresh spices, once again, adds a certain depth of flavor, as well as a brightness that you're really not going to get if you're using pre-ground spices, as they have time to oxidize and lose complexity. If you don't have fresh spices, or I should say whole spices, that's totally fine. You can still make it work, but make the switch if you haven't already. Mortar and pestle is a helpful tool. You can also use a spice grinder or just a rolling pin, a heavy pan to kind of place it on top of the seeds and give it a crush. Now I'm going to add my garlic and my ginger right on into my pan with the onions. As you can see, they've softened a little bit. Some people say they get translucent. I guess that's one descriptor you can use. Giving them a nice stir, and we're just gonna let them cook for maybe 30 seconds before, as you can see here, adding up my crushed spices. Adding your spices before you add your liquids allows them the opportunity to toast, which is gonna bring out certain notes and depths of flavor that you're just not gonna get if you add them after the fact. And as you can see, I added the more coarsely crushed spices before adding the powdered spices, because those powdered spices are much more likely to burn. But now I'm adding a little bit of turmeric and adding a hint of cayenne pepper. Here we go with some cinnamon. I know that sounds weird, but it brings out this wonderful smokiness. You don't want to leave it out. So we're adding our cilantro. Probably gonna give this all 30 seconds to a minute stirring it around before adding those tomatoes, but here they come. I'm giving this another stir, and in just a minute, I'm gonna add my salt. I start out with about a tablespoon. I know that sounds like a lot, but I promise this is a big recipe, so it gets dispersed. And also, we really just need to stop worrying about adding salt to our food that we home cooked, unless we're eating processed food or adding copious amounts. We really do not need to worry about the salt that we're just adding to a dish like this. So there, we're gonna rinse off our lentils. If you have not purchased pre-sorted lentils, which most of the time they're not pre-sorted, you're going to want to just put them on a baking sheet or something of that sort and sort them, is what we say, to make sure there aren't any little stones, and then rinsing them to get any dust off. Here we go, taking them right on over. We're going to add them to the pot. With the lentils, we're going to add about 3 cups of water, maybe 4. Your objective is just for the water to cover the lentils. We can always check in and add more water later if necessary, but that's generally the guideline I go by. So once again, give it a stir, make sure everything is thoroughly combined. And then really all we have to do is put the lid on and let them cook. Here we are about 45 to 50 minutes later. The lentils are mostly tender, but still have a little bit of a snap to them. Now we're gonna add our coconut milk. And in typical Sally fashion, I am spraying it all over the floor. You do not see the full extent of the mess I just made. In a second, I'm also gonna add the juice of 1 lime. I'm gonna add in my kale, and you're gonna taste it once you've gotten all of that stirred in, see if it needs any more salt, and then you're gonna add it. And here's what I'd say about salt, is you wanna add enough that it really makes the recipe zip. You don't want it to taste outright salty, but if you're thinking this is a little bit flat, probably the first thing you need to do is add just a little bit more salt, taste, and then go from there. I've just let the lentils simmer for another 10 to 15 minutes to make sure they are fully cooked and that the kale has softened. And voila, that is it.
We have made it to the end, and it is time for the mandatory taste test. I just served my lentils over some of my white rice. If you want to see how to make the best rice in the world, watch the video I filmed last week. That's a big bite. Hold on, we're gonna check it. Sorry. Okay. That's really freaking good. I'm not really surprised, but yeah, you should try this recipe. Let me know if you do it. Let me know how you like it on somewhere.